So in the last episode of this series on building guitar number 85, we left off with our binding and purfling channels routed and ready to go, and with our end wedge installed. So now let's pick up where we left off, installing the binding, purfling, and mother of pearl. And then we'll see what we get into after that. Now we're ready to install the binding. Just like with the rosette, this is a two-step process. We're first going to install the binding, 2 purfling strips, and the Teflon filler strip. And then after the fact, after the glue is dry, we are going to remove that filler strip and install our mother of pearl pieces. And getting all of these elements to cooperate is a bit more difficult than on your typical binding purfling scheme, simply because you have the somewhat rigid elements of the binding itself and the dyed fiber strips, which are sort of elastic but also fairly rigid, and then the Teflon strip, which is more like you're trying to wrangle a snake. It's just loose and flopping all around, and so the difference between handling all those materials, because you're handling them all at the same time, can make this job the kind of thing that you should practice ahead of time. Alright, and so now moving on to the second piece here, I have to get this to not only butt up against the other side binding here, but also our side purfling strip here. I need to meet up something like that, right? So to make that happen, I gotta cut this side purfling back and at the appropriate angle so that it hits there, and then the rest of this binding up here will just slide right over the top. Alright, and now after a couple back and forths, cutting and then checking it and then going back to the chisel, cutting off a little bit more, I've now got it to where I want it to be. It looks really good. At this point, after the glue has cured and the tape has been removed, some builders would remove that Teflon strip. But I actually like to level everything with the Teflon strip still in place for that same reason which I mentioned earlier when we did the rosette, which is that that Teflon strip is actually bracing up against the sides of the 2 dyed fiber strips and keeping them from curling over under the pressure of the finger plane. Once everything is as level as I can get it with the finger plane without nicking into that soundboard, I then run over everything with the random orbital sander just to even it up. Alright, so here's the coolest part. Once I have this leveled, not all the way, but most of the way, I'm actually going to pull out this Teflon strip because it's not really glued in there. It's Teflon. That's the point, is that it's not going to get stuck with the glue. There it is. And then look at this. How cool is that? It just peels right out and leaves a nice, clean, and consistent channel for us to do our pearl work next. Let's switch modes now to the final part of doing our binding scheme here, which is installing the mother of pearl, both the straight sections in the straight areas and the curved sections as I come around into this continuously variable curve on the lower bout and on the upper bout. And now I begin the tedious process of shaping and sizing and installing each individual piece of pearl. Now each piece is going to have a unique size and angle in order for it to follow the curves of the guitar. Although this is tedious work, it's actually one of my favorite things to do. It's incredibly enjoyable because it's constantly engaging. Every piece, like I just mentioned, is unique in the size that you'll need and the angle. So you're constantly having to adjust and do things a little bit different as you encounter different curves. It's fun. Use a straight piece or a bent piece here? That is the question. And I have both. I have my straight pieces and my bent pieces. And that, yeah, that would work really well with about a third of this bent piece right here. Would fit there nicely. This, by the way, has been the process all the way around here, always making these tiny decisions of, am I going to use the straight piece? Am I going to use the curved piece? Am I going to use 2/3 of the length of an individual piece, or am I going to cut it much smaller than that? Because that's the way, you know, you have a constantly changing radius here, and sometimes it's straight. That's the way you follow that radius, because all of these curved pieces are the exact same curve. But I can still follow that radius by, one, deciding whether I'm going to use the curved piece or the straight piece. If the radius is very slight, you can just use a bunch of straight pieces, cut really small so that you can turn with that radius. If the radius is a little bit more, you might upgrade to the curved pieces, and then depending on how severe that radius is, you're either going to use more of the straight piece or break it into little chunks and use it to turn. Okay, so let's take a look. Yeah, let's cut this right about there. Put my hand over that so it doesn't go flying and hit me in the eye or go skittering off the table. Alright, clean up that edge I just cut. Make sure it's pretty square too. Okay. And the other edge, just want to square that up as well a little bit. Let's see how it fits. Okay, that'll be pretty good. I'm just going to adjust the mating angle slightly to make it just a little bit better. Alright, let's check that out. Alright. And onward we go. Almost at the end here. It's funny, I actually am pretty close to running out of these. I'm going to make it, but for a little bit here, I actually thought I was going to have to order more little pearl purfling pieces a second time, and it took over a week for this to come in, which, as you all know right now, shipping is nuts. So yeah, I was getting real nervous that I was going to have to delay this a second time for another week or more. But I'm going to make it, and then I'll be good. I shouldn't need to order anything else for this guitar. I have everything I need. Alright, let's finish this up. Alright, now with all of these done, I'm going to secure them with a little bit of water-thin super glue. Now I want to start with a fresh, unused whip tip here, just because I don't want to make a mess of this. I want to very carefully hit each joint with a nice, fine, clean tip of the glue bottle. Yeah. Alright, here we go. The whip tips were in the fridge. They don't need to be there, but that's where the super glue stays, so they were with the super glue. Alright, so gravity is your friend here. There's no real good reason to squeeze the glue bottle here, because I just need the tiniest drop. And if I do have a little excess, which I'm getting here, I'm kind of tending towards the ebony side, because that's where my safety is. I can let some extra glue run along that edge and there's no problem. But the redwood I want to protect from the cyanoacrylate glue, aka super glue. Why do I want to protect it? Because softwoods tend to get deeply stained by super glues. A little bit usually isn't a problem, but if you just kind of flood the area, you're almost guaranteed to get some deep stains that you won't be able to sand out. Alright guys, and here we have it. At long last, the sound box is complete and sanded back and looking gorgeous with all the cool pearl in the rosewood, ebony bindings, the side binding, which honestly came out looking a little thinner than I expected. I kind of wish that that side binding was just a little chunkier. I've done thicker white purfling lines like this in the past, and I think I like them a little bit more than these very, very thin ones. But that's how you figure things out. You just try different things. So there's still one more thing that this needs, and that's the mortise. And at the same time that I'm setting up the mortise on here, I'll also be doing the corresponding tenon that goes into the neck blank, of course. So that's what's coming up next, is all of that tricky neck angle stuff. And it's a new morning, and thus begins the tricky neck angle stuff. So I'm not going to get too into the details here, because really to understand this incredible jig called the Luthier Tool neck angle jig, that would really just take its own video all by itself, if not a series of videos. It's a bit complicated, but the results are fantastic. So I have everything set up, and I'm going to first cut the mortise into the sound box, and after that I'm going to hop over to the neck angle jig that I have to my left and cut the tenon, which is what really defines the angle which we have cut into the shoulders of our tenon. That is where the magic happens. That's where we get our neck angle. You know, if I have to be covered in dust at the end of a job, then there's no better dust to be covered in than Port Orford Cedar. This stuff smells fantastic. I know I've said that before. Anyway, let's move on. Alright, and this is always super satisfying to check out our fit here and just to see how nice and snug everything is, and to kind of eyeball that angle and see how that came out. Of course, it's only super satisfying if everything came out well, and it did here, so I'm satisfied. One thing I always do at this point is there should be a tiny gap at the back of the tenon, and that's to allow for expansion of the wood through moisture exchange with the environment over time. So wood expands and contracts, and if you don't leave a little bit of space here between the back edge of the tenon and the bottom of the mortise there, then when this expands a little bit, it's actually going to push your neck up and out and totally ruin your beautiful neck angle that you worked so hard for. So, always prudent to put a little gap there. It doesn't really matter too much what it is. About 1/16 of an inch is a good conservative gap. I'm going to go ahead and give myself about that much gap. Alright, there we go. Now we've got a gap. Before I install the truss rod, I like to add just a dot of oil on the threads of both nuts at either end of the truss rod. And I'll leave this for you guys in the comments. I'm adding regular old bathroom and kitchen silicone caulk to the bottom of my channel. And if anyone can figure out why I'm doing that, go ahead and please add that into the comments and let me know what you think. Take a wild guess. Okay, and so what else I'm doing here is I'm adding a clamp and some cawls to the tenon end before I tap in the truss rod with a mallet. And that's simply because the tenon is narrow and thus a weak area, where if I just tap that in, it might stress that area so much that it'll actually break off part of the wood alongside the truss rod channel. So it's a good cautionary step to add that clamp to hold pressure against the tenon. And now I'm ready to glue the fretboard. So I've positioned the fretboard very carefully and accurately using pins which I've drilled through the fret slots to install these pins so that when I glue this down, the fretboard will hold its location without any creep or slide to either side. Okay, and now I'm turning my attention to the bridge for a minute. And really, this is a job I could do much later on in the build. We're not actually gluing the bridge anytime soon, but since I'm waiting for the fretboard to finish, for the glue time to finish on that fretboard, I've got a little time on my hands, so I'm going to turn my attention to radiusing the bridge glue surface. Okay, so the mating surface has been sanded to conform to the radius of the top, and I've smoothed it. I've cycled through 3 different grits all the way up to 220 grit so that this surface is nice and smooth. And now, if you've done this well, it should almost feel like a magnet when you place it on there, because there's so much friction between the 2 surfaces. It's really pretty cool. There's no way to show that through the camera, of course. It's a tactile thing, but when you try this yourselves, just make a note of that. You'll notice after a while, when you get good at it and you really start to do a good job, you'll notice that feel to it, that sort of magnetic touch. Well, that's all for now. In the next episode on this series on building guitar number 85, you can expect to see some neck carving, among other things. So, lots of fun, lots of lutherie action in the next episode. Bye for now. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.